I never imagined that unlocking an old wooden gate would change everything I believed about the man I had loved for nearly 20 years. 3 weeks after my husband, Adrian Cole, was laid to rest, I finally gathered the courage to visit the isolated mountain cabin he had always insisted on maintaining by himself, believing I would spend the afternoon sorting through dusty furniture and painful memories before quietly saying my final goodbye. The winding road leading to the cabin felt strangely unfamiliar despite all the stories Adrian had shared about its peaceful surroundings, and every turn seemed to carry me deeper into a place untouched by the outside world. My heart ached with grief as I replayed our happiest moments together, wondering why he had always become unusually quiet whenever I asked if I could accompany him on one of his weekend visits. When I stepped onto the front porch, I immediately noticed something that shattered my expectations because freshly watered flower boxes decorated every window. Children's bicycles rested against the railing, and colorful chalk drawings covered the wooden steps. None of it matched the abandoned retreat I had imagined, and an uneasy feeling settled over me as I searched my purse for the old brass key Adrian had given me years earlier. The lock clicked open without resistance, but instead of stale air and neglected rooms, I was greeted by the comforting aroma of homemade soup drifting from the kitchen, and the distant sound of laughter echoing through the hallway. The furniture had been carefully polished, family blankets were folded neatly across the couches, and dozens of handmade drawings covered the refrigerator as though several children had been living there for quite some time. My pulse raced uncontrollably while my mind struggled to explain what I was seeing because framed photographs displayed smiling strangers enjoying birthdays, holiday dinners, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. Every terrifying possibility rushed through my thoughts, and for one heartbreaking moment, I wondered if Adrian had spent years building another life while I believed we shared every important secret. A staircase creaked overhead before slow footsteps approached, and a woman in her early 30s cautiously descended while gently holding the hand of a frightened little boy who immediately hid behind her. Within seconds, two more women appeared from different rooms carrying sleepy children in their arms, and the fear on every face was so overwhelming that they looked less like intruders and more like people expecting danger to arrive at any moment. "I need someone to explain why you're inside my husband's property," I demanded, while struggling to steady my trembling voice. Yet the only response was complete silence as the children clung even tighter to their mothers. My confusion quickly turned into anger because every unanswered question seemed to confirm my worst fears, and I reached for my phone with the intention of calling the authorities before the situation became even more confusing. Just as I unlocked my phone, an elderly man hurried through the front entrance, carrying a worn leather satchel, his face filled with urgency instead of panic as he begged me to wait only a few minutes before making a decision I might later regret. Introducing himself as Samuel Turner, he explained that he had worked alongside Adrian for more than a decade and quietly insisted that nothing I believed about the cabin was actually true. Samuel carefully invited me into a small study tucked away behind a hidden bookshelf where a weathered cedar chest rested on an old writing desk, and my name had been carved into its lid with remarkable care long before Adrian's death. As I slowly lifted the lid, I discovered neatly organized letters, photographs, financial records, handwritten journals, and sealed envelopes, stretching back nearly 16 years. And the very first letter began with a sentence that made tears fill my eyes before I had even finished reading. "If you are holding this letter, then I could not tell you my greatest secret in person, but I pray that, once you know the truth, you will understand why I chose silence over explanation." I unfolded the first letter with trembling hands while Samuel quietly stepped outside to give me privacy, and every carefully written sentence carried the familiar warmth of Adrian's voice as though he were sitting beside me one final time. He admitted that the greatest burden of his life had never been keeping a secret from the world, but keeping it from the woman he loved more than anyone else because revealing the truth could have placed countless innocent people in danger. The next several pages revealed a heartbreaking chapter of Adrian's life that had happened years before we ever met, when his older cousin, Evelyn, spent years trapped in a violent marriage and repeatedly searched for somewhere safe to escape with her young son. Every shelter she contacted was already full or too easily discovered, and after one final desperate attempt to flee, she disappeared forever, leaving Adrian with a lifetime of guilt and an unbreakable promise that no family would ever be forced to face the same hopeless choice again. Determined to honor that promise, Adrian secretly purchased the isolated cabin using savings he had accumulated over many years, transforming it into a hidden sanctuary that could never be linked directly to any public organization or advertised location. He quietly partnered with trusted attorneys, licensed counselors, volunteer doctors, social workers, and carefully selected community leaders who shared one mission: protecting survivors before violence could claim another life. Another letter explained why he had never invited me to the cabin despite my countless requests throughout our marriage, and his words carried both sorrow and unwavering conviction as he confessed that every additional person who knew the address increased the possibility that someone dangerous could eventually discover it. He wrote that keeping me unaware had never reflected a lack of trust, but rather the painful responsibility of protecting families whose lives depended upon absolute secrecy. As I continued reading, photographs slipped from one of the folders and scattered across the desk, showing Adrian repairing broken fences alongside smiling children, helping teenagers plant vegetable gardens, and celebrating quiet birthday parties with families whose names I had never heard before. Looking at those pictures completely changed my understanding of the weekends he had spent away from home, because every unexplained absence had actually been another act of compassion hidden behind ordinary excuses. Samuel gently returned to the study after noticing my tears, and instead of offering sympathy, he simply asked whether I was ready to meet the people whose lives Adrian had quietly transformed over the years. I nodded without speaking, because every assumption I had carried into the cabin had already collapsed, leaving only an overwhelming desire to understand the incredible mission my husband had protected in silence. The first woman introduced herself as Nora, explaining that she had arrived at the cabin during a freezing winter night with nothing but a backpack and her frightened twin daughters after escaping years of relentless abuse. She told me Adrian had personally driven through a snowstorm to ensure they reached safety, never asking for gratitude or recognition because he believed that dignity mattered just as much as protection. Another resident, Melissa, shared how she had arrived carrying her infant son after walking for hours through heavy rain because she believed no one would ever help someone with no money, no family, and nowhere to go. She smiled through tears while explaining that Adrian greeted her with a warm meal, clean clothes, and one unforgettable sentence that gave her hope again: "You are not a burden here, you are a beginning." As the afternoon slowly faded into evening, children filled the yard with laughter while chasing one another beneath towering pine trees, and for the first time I realized those joyful voices represented victories over fear rather than ordinary childhood games. Standing among families who had rebuilt their lives inside those walls, I understood that Adrian's greatest achievement had never been measured by wealth or success, but by the countless futures he had quietly rescued without expecting the world to ever know his name. As darkness settled over the valley, Samuel led me into a modest office where Adrian had kept detailed journals documenting every improvement made to the sanctuary, and each page reflected years of careful planning driven by compassion instead of recognition. I discovered budgets for food, medical treatment, education, emergency transportation, and legal assistance, proving that every dollar had been invested with one purpose: giving frightened families a genuine chance to rebuild their lives. The final sealed envelope rested beneath the journals, and I hesitated before opening it because I knew these would be the last words Adrian had ever written directly to me. His letter asked for only one promise, explaining that if I ever uncovered the truth after his passing, he hoped I would choose courage over grief and continue protecting the people who still needed the sanctuary more than ever. I spent the entire night walking through every room of the cabin, noticing details that carried Adrian's quiet kindness in ways I had never recognized before. The sturdy bunk beds, brightly painted playroom, overflowing bookshelves, and carefully maintained garden were not random comforts but thoughtful reminders that healing often begins with ordinary moments that make people feel safe again. The following morning, I gathered everyone in the dining room and admitted that I had arrived believing my husband had betrayed me, but the truth had completely transformed my understanding of the man I thought I already knew. Instead of judging his decision to remain silent, I thanked every family for trusting him and promised that the sanctuary would never close its doors as long as I had the strength to protect it. Keeping that promise required far more than good intentions because the property needed repairs, additional funding, stronger security, and reliable partnerships with organizations capable of helping families begin independent lives. I devoted months to learning everything Adrian had quietly managed alone, often feeling overwhelmed, but refusing to abandon the mission that had become the most meaningful part of his legacy. With Samuel's guidance and the dedication of countless volunteers, we expanded the sanctuary beyond the original cabin by restoring nearby buildings into comfortable living spaces and creating classrooms where children could continue their education without fear. Licensed therapists, teachers, doctors, and legal advocates joined our growing network, allowing every resident to receive the practical support and emotional care necessary to rebuild a future filled with hope. Over the years, I watched women who had once arrived terrified and broken gradually rediscover their confidence, secure meaningful employment, and move into homes where peace replaced constant fear. Their children, who had once hidden behind their mothers whenever a stranger approached, slowly became confident. Young people chasing dreams that once seemed impossible. One spring afternoon, a little girl named Lily handed me a drawing of the cabin, surrounded by sunshine, flowers, and smiling families, explaining that she wanted to remember the place where she first learned that kindness still existed. Looking at her simple picture, I realized Adrian's greatest gift had never been the buildings themselves, but the belief he restored inside people who had nearly lost all hope. Today, the sanctuary continues welcoming families searching for safety, and although Adrian's name appears nowhere on the entrance, his compassion lives within every meal served, every child who laughs without fear, and every survivor who begins a new chapter with dignity. Whenever I hear joyful voices echoing across the property, I no longer think about loss, because I know the man I loved continues changing lives through the promise we now protect together. If this story touched your heart, remember that quiet acts of kindness often create the greatest miracles, and every person has the power to become a source of hope for someone facing unimaginable darkness. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.